Sure, absolutely. You know, I mean, superstition is what you have when you don't know what the hell you're talking about, fundamentally. Although I wouldn't put it down that much, because, you know, often superstitions are like quasi-functional theories. You know, so they're, and theories have there's a lot of different ways that a theory can be valid. You know, we talked about functional utility as well. And some things that look like they're superstitious have functional utility. They're approximations. And one thing to think about a theory is, I think of theories as tools. And that's a pragmatic perspective. And so I would think of science as a tool. I think religion is a tool as well. And nobody would complain if they had a toolbox full of different tools, right? And you can chop down a tree with a hammer if you have to, but it would be better to use an axe. But a hammer beats the hell out of a stick. So, you know, my point is that even a bad theory can be a better tool than the one you had before. It's like approximations to the perfect tool in some sense. So I think your thinking is going to be a hell of a lot easier, you know, all things considered, if you start to think about theories as tools, and to also think about the theory as a tool that has a limited domain of applicability. And that is a pragmatic idea. And I really think the pragmatists were right. I think they got it right.
Do you think religion is still a universal human characteristic? Is there many people that go through their lives without practicing any kind of religion?
No, there aren't. They just think that. How many vegans do you know? You know, they're clueless religious. Because what they have is ritual without philosophy, fundamentally. So what's happened in many cases is that as the sophisticated religions, so to speak, have collapsed, what emerges from their ashes are rituals. And rituals are sort of the ground out of which a religion emerges. Vegans, vegetarians, environmentalists, anybody who's an ideologue, you know, and the reason that I would consider those in the religious domain is because they're systems of value, and they're predicated on fundamental assumptions that you have to take on faith. See, that's the thing that's so peculiar, because it really turns out that if you're going to act, and you have to make assumptions. And the reason for that is, what the hell do you know? You got to put your ignorance somewhere. And people put their ignorance, they box it up inside their assumptions. And those assumptions vary. So, and then, you know, the other thing is, you got to ask yourself when you're wondering if someone is religious, what you use as a marker. Now, the typical marker would be, I give you a questionnaire and I ask you, are you religious, or do you go to church, or, you know, do you follow the precepts and rituals of something that we would recognize as a standard religion? And lots of people will say no to that, eh? But then you watch them and you think, and this is a Nietzschean observation, what makes you think that the morality that you consider moral hasn't been conditioned to the absolute last degree by 2,000 years or 3,000 years of, in the West at least, Judeo-Christian tradition? It's like all the ideas of, fundamentally, all the ideas that individuals have value, it's like, which is a very peculiar idea. You know, everyone here, all you people virtually, I would suspect, believe that. It's like, why do you believe that? And what do you mean you believe it? What does that mean? And what it means is, you act as if it's true. And I don't care what you say, like, what the hell do you know about what you believe? You know, you come to university, you can probably spout off a few ideologies and rationalize all sorts of complex behaviors, but the idea that you actually know what you're up to or who you are is like, why would you think that? You're the most complicated thing that exists. So you don't think you understand the sun, you know, and the sun's a lot less complicated than you are. So I don't buy for a moment the idea that people don't have religious beliefs. They just are generally clueless about what they are. So, and that's actually part of the problem I want to address, is that one of the things that has happened is that, in some sense, what the evolved religions, let's call them, did was, there's a behavioral substructure that constitutes cultural practice, accepted cultural practice, and I would say it's predicated on observations like, there's an optimal pattern of behavior that's associated with success across dominance hierarchies. That's the central value. It's something like that. And that happens everywhere, and there are similarities in those rituals because there are similarities among human beings and similarities among dominance hierarchies. Okay, so you get the behavior laid down first, as which everyone's acting like a pro-social creature, And then the next thing you get is the representation, the symbolic representation of what the pro-sociality might be like, and then you get that expressed in religious symbolism, and then on top of that you get something like an articulated system of religious propositions, and then on top of that maybe you extract out a philosophy. It's something like that. So it's relatively coherent across different levels of analysis. Now what happened in the 19th century, and partly because of the rise of science, is that the conscious element of the religious belief got flipped on its head, because everybody woke up and said, what the hell do we believe these things for? And what do we even mean they're true? Virgin birth and reincarnated God and, you know, God the Father and all the peculiar propositions of Christianity and Judaism and Islam. It's like, we wake up, we think, oh, look what we're doing. We don't know what we're doing, and here we have this whole new body of knowledge that suggests that none of that is factually true. Well, no one was saying, well, maybe there's more than one form of truth, you know, and people weren't thinking about pragmatic truth, for example, or behavioral truth. They were having this weird conflict, which you all suffer from, between, you know, a materialist description of reality and what? Religious propositions that didn't seem to be in concordance with that. You know, we've looked far out into heaven through the Hubble telescope. Nobody found God. Does that mean there's no God in heaven? Depends on what you mean by God. Depends on what you mean by heaven. So it's not obvious at all that the heaven of the medieval thinkers is the same as the space that we know about from an empirical perspective. It's not obvious at all. So okay, so let's stop for a bit.